They opened their doors to their only daughter. They gave her food, shelter, and a chance to start over. But on a cold March night, their generosity cost them their lives. This is the story of the Harper murders and the secret that stunned even seasoned detectives. To understand the tragedy of March 27th, we must first step back into the Harper family's life as it was just months before the murders. Robert Harper was 54, a self-employed mechanic who ran Harper Auto down on Mill Road. Friends described him as steady, unpretentious, always in oil-stained overalls and always willing to help a neighbor whose car had broken down. Elaine Harper, 52, taught at the local elementary school. Her students remembered her as patient, funny, and fiercely protective. Together, Robert and Elaine had built a modest but comfortable life. Their home, beige siding, green shutters, was the same house they'd bought when Melissa was born. It had hosted birthday parties, Thanksgiving dinners, graduation celebrations. Melissa Harper had once been the center of those celebrations. In high school, she was bright, artistic, and a little restless. But after graduation, she drifted from one community college program to another, then from one job to the next. By the winter of 2022, she was unemployed, behind on rent for a small apartment in town, and carrying thousands in credit card debt. When her lease was terminated, she called her parents. They didn't hesitate. "Come home," they told her. "We'll figure it out together." In January 2023, Melissa moved back into her childhood bedroom. She posted a smiling selfie to her social media, a photo captioned, "Fresh Start." Friends thought the arrangement was temporary, just long enough for her to get back on her feet. But for Robert and Elaine, the first signs of strain appeared almost immediately. At first, the disagreements were small. Melissa slept late, left dishes in the sink, ignored chores. Robert grumbled, but Elaine reminded him she was under stress. Weeks passed. Bills for utilities climbed. Melissa hadn't applied for jobs. Packages kept arriving from online shopping. Arguments became louder, more frequent. Neighbors later told police. The days that followed felt, to the Harpers' friends, like watching a slow-motion train wreck. From the outside, the beige house on Oak Lane looked unchanged. Same curtains in the window, same potted plants on the porch. Inside, Robert and Elaine tiptoed around their own daughter. Melissa's bedroom door stayed closed more often than not. When she did appear, it was to demand the car keys or complain about the food in the refrigerator. She had stopped speaking to her parents at dinner. She ate alone, scrolling on her phone. Robert tried jokes. Elaine tried patience. Neither worked. In her private messages, later recovered by detectives, Melissa wrote to a friend, "They're suffocating me. They want to control me. I swear, if they push me out, I'm done." The words read like a threat she didn't yet fully understand herself. On March 20th, a week before the murders, the tension boiled over. Elaine confronted Melissa about missing cash from her purse. Melissa screamed back that her mother was crazy, that she was being treated like a criminal. Robert stepped in, tried to calm things down. Melissa slammed the front door and disappeared into the night. When she returned the next morning, her eyes were red, but she said nothing. Robert later told a neighbor, "I don't know who she is anymore." That same week, Melissa met Derek at a diner off the highway. Security footage would later show them sitting in a booth, heads together. Derek, a 26-year-old with a string of petty arrests, told police he thought she was venting. She told him her parents were about to kick her out. She hinted at wanting to scare them into changing their minds. Derek claims he refused to be involved. The footage would become a key piece of evidence for prosecutors. Meanwhile, Elaine quietly finished drafting the letter to her sister about the will change. She tucked it into a desk drawer, planning to mail it after the weekend. Neither she nor Robert suspected Melissa knew about it. But investigators believe Melissa had already found the note and realized that being thrown out would also mean losing any claim to her parents' assets. On March 26th, Robert spent the evening in his garage. He had locked his revolver away after a rash of burglaries in town, slipping the key into his coat pocket. Melissa watched him from the kitchen window, face blank. That night, she searched online for how to change a will fast and, quote, "Can a notary come to you?" The searches, later retrieved from her laptop, would help prosecutors paint a picture of premeditation. March 27th began like any other day in the Harper household. Elaine left for school early, Robert for the garage. Melissa stayed in bed until nearly noon. But neighbors noticed something different. Melissa pacing on the porch, smoking one cigarette after another, phone pressed to her ear. Around 4 p.m., she left the house and returned carrying a duffel bag. Detectives believe she was retrieving papers she had hidden at a storage unit, including a forged version of her parents' will. By evening, the storm that had been forecast rolled into Maple Creek. Rain lashed against the windows, wind howled through the trees. Inside the Harper home, an argument began. A neighbor heard Robert's voice, sharp and raised. Another heard Elaine crying. At 8:15 p.m., Robert phoned his brother, venting about Melissa's behavior, saying the deadline was tomorrow and he couldn't take it anymore. According to prosecutors, at some point after that call, Melissa retrieved her father's revolver from the toolbox. How she got the key remains unclear, but gunshot residue tests later proved she handled it. What happened next can only be reconstructed from forensic evidence and Melissa's shifting statements. Investigators believe that shortly after 9:30 p.m., the argument reached a breaking point. Robert may have told Melissa she had to leave immediately. Elaine may have tried to intervene. The first shot struck Robert in the chest near the living room doorway. The second struck Elaine as she tried to flee. Both died within minutes. At 9:42 p.m., Melissa dialed 911. The call, now public record, begins with a sobbing voice. "There's been a break-in. My parents. There's blood everywhere." Dispatchers dispatched units immediately. Within minutes, patrol cars pulled up to the Harper home, lights flashing against the rain-slicked street. Officers entered cautiously, weapons drawn. They found Robert and Elaine on the floor of the living room. No sign of an intruder. Melissa told the first officer she had been upstairs when she heard shots. She claimed she saw a masked man fleeing through the back door. But detectives found no footprints in the mud outside, no forced entry, no disturbed locks. The only gun in the house was Robert's revolver, still warm. When crime scene techs tested Melissa's hands, they detected gunshot residue. In her bedroom, they found the duffel bag with documents, including the forged will. In the early hours of March 28th, Melissa was taken to the station for questioning. She maintained her story of an intruder, then shifted to blaming Derek, then finally fell silent. Detectives described her demeanor as alternating between hysteria and cold calculation. One detective later said, "It was like she was trying on different versions of the story to see which one would stick." By dawn, the quiet suburb of Maple Creek was awake to the news. 2 beloved community members dead, their daughter in custody. Reporters converged on Oak Lane. Neighbors gathered on lawns, shaking their heads. No one could reconcile the cheerful girl they remembered with the crime she was accused of committing. By the morning after the killings, Maple Creek's sense of safety was gone. Police cars idled at the end of Oak Lane, crime scene tape fluttering in the wind. Inside the station, detectives pored over evidence, photographs, text messages, bank records. The story of a masked intruder didn't fit, and as they dug deeper, a far darker picture began to emerge. Detectives examined the revolver found beside Robert's body. The fingerprints on the handle belonged only to Robert and Melissa. There were no unfamiliar shoe prints, no forced windows, no pry marks on doors. Even the back gate was still latched. If someone came in, one investigator later said, they must have been invisible. That morning they asked Melissa to retell her story. She said she had been upstairs with headphones on, heard shots, and saw a man in a hoodie running out. When pressed for details, she faltered, first saying the man was tall, then short, first saying the hoodie was black, then gray. The inconsistencies grew. When asked how the intruder got in, she shrugged. She seemed more worried about her phone than her parents' funerals. Meanwhile, the forensics team opened Melissa's duffel bag. Inside, they found paperwork that stopped them cold. A freshly printed last will and testament dated March 26th, naming Melissa sole beneficiary of her parents' assets. The signatures of Robert and Elaine were obvious forgeries to the trained eye. There was also a business card for a mobile notary service scheduled for March 28th, the day after the murders. The discovery transformed the investigation from a suspected burglary gone wrong to a case of premeditated double murder. Detectives then tracked down Derek, the boyfriend seen with Melissa at the diner. He told them she had asked him to, quote, help scare her parents, but he had refused. He handed over text messages in which Melissa complained that her parents were about to ruin my life and hinted that she would take care of it. Derek's cooperation would later help him avoid charges, but it also gave prosecutors a timeline of Melissa's planning. On March 30th, with the evidence mounting, detectives confronted Melissa. They showed her the forged will. She stared at it, expression blank. They told her about Derek's statements. She asked for a lawyer. The interview ended. From that moment on, her defense would claim she suffered a mental breakdown, that the shootings were not planned but a sudden snap. Prosecutors, armed with the will, the gun, and the residue tests, argued otherwise. The trial began in October 2023. The courthouse overflowed with reporters, neighbors, former students of Elaine's, and customers of Robert's garage. The prosecution opened by describing a, quote, pattern of entitlement and rage that culminated in cold-blooded murder for money. They displayed the forged will on a giant screen. They called handwriting experts who testified the signatures were fake. They played the 911 call, pointing out the calmness in Melissa's voice between sobs. The defense painted a different picture. A troubled young woman pushed to the edge, terrified of homelessness, who snapped in a moment of panic. They said the forged will was a misguided attempt to secure her future, not evidence of premeditation. They asked the jury to consider second-degree murder. But then came the moment that made headlines nationwide. the mind-blowing climax of the case. Midway through the trial, prosecutors unveiled a second document recovered from Melissa's email drafts, an unsigned, quote, confession letter she had written to herself on March 25th, 2 days before the murders. In it, she rehearsed explanations for killing her parents, blaming a mysterious intruder. The email, time-stamped and traced to her laptop, ended with the words, "They think they can cut me out, but I won't let them." Gasps filled the courtroom. Reporters tweeted live updates. Even seasoned court staff shook their heads. The confession draft demolished the defense's claim of a sudden snap. It showed planning, deception, and a motive rooted in greed. After its introduction, Melissa's lawyers shifted strategy, focusing on mental illness as mitigation. But the damage was done. After 3 weeks of testimony, the jury deliberated less than a day. They returned guilty verdicts on 2 counts of first-degree murder, plus forgery and use of a firearm in the commission of a felony. In the packed courtroom, the judge sentenced Melissa Harper to life in prison without parole. Robert and Elaine's friends embraced. Some wept. Melissa stared straight ahead, expressionless. Outside the courthouse, prosecutors called the case a tragedy of generosity betrayed. Reporters asked why Robert and Elaine hadn't sought help sooner, why Melissa's spiral hadn't been stopped. Neighbors left flowers at the Harper home. The house was eventually sold at auction, its beige siding a mute witness to what had happened inside. Today, Melissa Harper is incarcerated at Maple State Penitentiary. Derek moved out of town. Elaine's former students still place flowers at her grave on Teacher Appreciation Day. And the community of Maple Creek remembers the Harpers not for how they died, but for how they lived. Generous, trusting, and, in the end, victims of a crime that shocked even seasoned investigators. The case stands as a stark reminder. Family violence rarely explodes without warning. It builds, layer by layer, through resentment, secrecy, and desperation. And sometimes, as in the Harper murders, it ends not just in tragedy but in betrayal on a scale that still defies comprehension. Thank you for watching, and if you found this case as shocking as we did, hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications.